Let's start with Paula. Okay. Hi, I'm Paula. Thanks for attending today. I want to just give you an overview of what cabin is to kind of start the discussion. We'll kind of review it in our organizations, kind of overviews, and then just move into more of a dialogue. So sounds good. Let's do this. So cabin is the Central Appalachian Brownfields Innovation Network. And what it is this a peer exchange group of brownfields practitioners in addition to their local communities who are really working together to facilitate the use of brownfields and mine-scarred lands across Appalachia. And Appalachia is divided amongst 3 EPA regions. There are regions 3, 4, and 5. And while that may make sense administratively, it doesn't make sense in the day-to-day workings of communities. So, for example, the rural communities in West Virginia, I feel that's much more in common with the rural Tennessee communities than they do perhaps with the urban cores of Pennsylvania and Maryland, even though they share that same EPA region. So, as a result, get my thoughts together here. We really felt that there was just a limited opportunity for these communities to connect, share best practices, and learn from each other across the EPA regions. And so that's where Cabin bridges that gap, being that peer exchange network, meeting together, talking together, connecting communities with other communities that may be in a different EPA region, but still share the same characteristics of being in Appalachia. So that's what I got for Cabin. Yeah.
Hello, I am, as Carrie said, Alicia Allen, and my title with the Hub is a long one, Community Development Programs Coordinator. This is one of a couple of statewide networks. Well, yes, statewide networks that I help coordinate, although the other is kind of broken into 2, but I won't get into the weeds of that. CCN is a statewide systems-focused network, built to bridge gaps and pull people out of the silos of community development sectors. When we stood the network up, which was truly before my time with the Hub, about a year in at this point, but there were think tanks that were held with leaders across the state that helped to identify community development sectors in order to define the system across the state. After that happened, the network, we hosted elections. So there's now a 15-person steering committee that drives the decisions for strategic planning as we decide what public-facing implementation strategies we want to provide for network members, which would be the public community members across the state. It's sort of an on-ramp to community development across the state, no matter the sector. Some of the main purposes of CCN are to be diverse enough to create a collective voice that is representative of the state, which really is truly different if you're talking about, what's happening in the Panhandle or, Southern West Virginia communities. And so in order to, I think, bridge those gaps and bring people out of silos, CCN hopes to collect data that can leverage positive trends in community development across the state. One of my favorite things about this network is that not only is it inclusive, but it's very asset focused, where most of the community development statistics across the state usually are deficit focused. And so we are really trying to create a space that highlights all of the positive community trends or development trends that are happening across the state, no matter the sector, no matter the geographic portion of the state. That's what I thought.
I'm Jamie Bennett. I'm the Executive Director of the West Virginia Land Stewardship Corporation. I think I know most of you, and because I got introduced to everyone I didn't know, now we all know each other. Trying to think where to start. So, as Carrie mentioned, the Land Stewardship Corporation provides coordination and advocacy support for the Abandoned Properties Coalition. I've actually been doing this work with the Abandoned Properties Coalition for longer than I've been in my current position. I used to work for the West Virginia Community Development Hub, doing a lot of their policy work, and APC was a big part of that. So I just kind of carried it on with me, and I moved over to be doing problem property work all the time. So the Abandoned Properties Coalition is a statewide coalition of technical assistance providers, local government representatives, concerned community members, funders. We all get together, and it's an opportunity for these folks, this kind of broad group of folks who are doing the work every day to elevate pressure points, pain points. What's keeping you from being effective at your job in addressing problem properties or addressing the needs of communities across the state as they relate to vacancy, abandonment, and property dilapidation. And so we elevate those challenges to the steering committee. The steering committee, kind of susses it out, figures out, what are some potential policy solutions to those problems. And then we draft bills and we run them at the Capitol, and we've had a pretty great success rate, I would say, over the last several years in terms of policies that we've been able to pass. One of the really cool things about the Abandoned Properties Coalition is that, we have this steering committee of technical assistance providers, and we have this really robust team structure. So when there's an idea, folks are like, oh, well, we really feel like land banking is a great tool for addressing some issues around problem properties in West Virginia. So we kind of get a bunch of folks to glom onto that idea. They form a team, and now we have a really great team, our land reuse team, which is basically functioning like West Virginia's State Land Banking Association at this point. So there's a lot of sort of flexibility and in the way that the coalition functions, but we really lean into that team structure as a way to both sort of be the workhorse of how we come up with what we're going to do and draft those policies and run those policies in the Capitol or do public education about the work that we're doing. But also to sort of make sure that we're getting a broader, more community-based idea about what it is that we need to be focused on as a coalition. So currently our focus areas include, as I mentioned, the land reuse team. We also have a team related to vacant school buildings. We also have a team related to historic tax credits, both federal and state level. And then the team is sort of always sort of putting our feelers out there for additional ideas, whether that includes like funding for brownfield remediation, or, we just had this Who Owns West Virginia meeting, and we've decided, that we're gonna start to build a team around that if there's enough interest. So those are some issues that we're working on right now. I guess we'll talk about other stuff later on. Okay, cool.
Great, we'll talk about other stuff later on. So I'm Beth Thompson, and as Carrie mentioned, I co-facilitate with Carrie the Downtown Appalachia Working Group, or DOG, as we affectionately call it. My title, much like Alicia's title, is long Community Development Partnerships Coordinator. So she and I have titles that almost sound the same. And DOG is a community of practice. And the thing I love about a community practice is that the folks that are having the conversations and at the table are actually the ones driving what happens with that group. So that group is very organic, and we currently meet every quarter, but there is a steering team we call, or an executive team is our title that we put in our charter that I helped write last year.
Wednesday morning group is what
The Wednesday morning group, yes, it's a very fun group. And so we have a smaller executive team that is sort of getting the nuts and bolts done for that organization, so that when the community of practice gets together, we can have robust conversations. We bring practitioners and thought partners that are working in downtown redevelopment work to the table. And we share out what's happening around the state at that time, connect, network, get the chance to link up in meaningful ways, lots of cool dialogue. We also have priority area working, little sub-team working groups around education, and it always changes its name, but perpetuation, but growing developers, supporting developers, and then also a policy working group, a policy sub-team that we share with community or with CCN, because it turns out that the policy, same folks work in the same space, so we share that policy sub-team with them. And I've been with the hub for about a year, as Alicia has, and in that time, it's been really interesting to see how that group has, comes together. You can learn a lot about downtown redevelopment in a short amount of time in that space, and, to see and share like what's going on around the state. I feel like I should say something else, but I did just find out. I was doing great.
Downtown launching is the first answer for the next question. So the next question, I love structure and process. And I was a part of building the structure for all of the organizations or the groups that we're talking about right now. And that gave a great overview of where we landed in downtown Plancha as community in practice. That only happened in the last year. But that group has been around since, we haven't been calling ourselves that. A lot of the people who started it have retired and moved on. So 2010-ish is what I just put on a formal presentation. So that's what we're going with. But it started as a conversation of people who wanted to center downtown redevelopment as an economic diversification and redevelopment strategy for West Virginia communities. In West Virginia, we have a really great Main Street program. We're really happy to partner with them here. That's a very specific approach, and it's a very specific requirement to be a Main Street community, and it requires a level of capacity that frankly most of our communities don't have. And so we wanted to think about how to do that in different ways and how to support communities that maybe will eventually become Main Streets. And even if they don't, that's not the goal, but it is sort of to fill that gap. So Main Street is a partner, they are a member of the steering committee, but it was originally started with some folks at the Benjamin Foundation, some folks at USDA Rural Development, Woodlands Development and Lending, and has gone through a lot of sort of iterations. It was very informal for a long time. We had a lot of conversations, and then as the federal money became available, we really started to get our act together, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what I love about this crew is that we're all kind of doing this outside of our day jobs, which we're going to talk about. Maybe do it in our day jobs, but most of us, this is not in the job description. It is a need that we saw that helps make our jobs easier, perhaps. Certainly makes my job richer to be a part of one of these groups. And that we see a value add. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But what I like is that they all look very different from a structure and process perspective, from very formal to very not formal. And so I think since we started talking about modules, which is closer to the formal end of the row, I want to go to Taylor and talk about more of the most, I think you're probably the sort of most formal APC is. We actually have bylaws. Nobody else here has bylaws. But we making space because we were not always this way. Also an iteration. And so yeah, let's go to Taylor, and then I don't know if Beth, you want to chime anything else about the structure too, but go that way because it actually goes that way after that. I just like to talk to you because the captain structure.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we were not always a very formal group. The APC was kind of incepted as this really sort of informal coalition that sort of built and grew when folks were really interested in policy issues we were working on, and kind of like went on a diet whenever folks weren't as interested in the policy issues that we were working on. And you know, when I kind of came to work with the hub, I was like, hey, you know, we should do some strategic planning and figure out what it is that we want to focus on as a coalition, because none of these people know whether they're part of the coalition or not. You know, you could ask the folks that were participating with us, are you an APC member? And they were like, and so in 2018, we went through a formal strategic planning process. We was at Hawksfest, right? Yeah. So through that process, we sort of identified that we did want to have a more formal structure. We wanted to lay out what our decision-making looked like, especially because we were engaging in, we were asking our membership to engage in these really ambitious policy and advocacy sort of initiatives. And we wanted to make sure that as we were doing that those initiatives were something that we could all stand behind with, you know, with your whole chest. And so we built the steering committee, which has 13 members. Some of them are ad hoc members and some of them are organizational members. The organizational members it's assumed that, the kind of the founding members of the steering committee, they'll always supply someone from their organization to sit on that committee. We formalized the process of elevating issues that teams were coming up with. So when a team says, hey, I think, we need to make sure that every deed coming out of the auditor's office has insurable title, that's a policy change. And so we formalized the process of how teams elevate those ideas to the steering committee, and then it gets voted on and approval. We instituted some bylaws. We've got term limits for our officers on the steering committee. We didn't go the full extra step of doing like a full 501c3 designation. I don't think we need to. It's a lot of the mechanics that, would need to be covered by that sort of designation are done by volunteer member organizations that are part of the group. But yeah, we did, kind of collectively as a group decide we really do need that formal structure, particularly because of the subject matter and the work that we're trying to do. So that's how that happened for us.
Yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what is the community practice and, yes, and what does that mean?
Sure, and I'll talk a little bit about our charter structure, because it's nowhere close to as formal as bylaws, but more formal than no structure whatsoever, I think we came up with. So community of practice is, it's a group of people that get together because they have a similar interest. And in this case, we based our charter, the idea of a community of practice kind of came from the healthcare field, and we based our charter that we developed on that. But it's, you're coming together and you have shared values and you have a shared goal, and you want to think about how to collectively do. It's sort of up to the community of practice to decide what they do. So that's what we did. The way our structure is set up is we have a charter and we have a mission and we have a vision and we have this sort of North Star, which Carrie talked about earlier, about downtown redevelopment and supporting that, and especially across the state and even in rural and small towns. And we have groups of people that we have a list of folks that are part of that community of practice, and they come to the meetings or they don't come to the meetings. There's no requirement for attendance. It is, if you want to come, great. If you're in the room, you're part of the decision-making process. That same community and so our decision-making process is, don't get mad if you're not in the room. If you're in the room and we're talking about something and we're figuring something out, we'll share out what the notes were, we'll share out what happened, but we didn't want to have to worry about a quorum or who's going to be there, who's not going to be there. And then once a year at our winter meeting, we look at who's at the table. Do we need other people at the table? And we formally kind of address our membership, if you will, at that time. We invite guests throughout the year. Different folks can bring to the table, hey, we think we need this again. It's a community of practice. Everybody's got that equal voice, that equal. We think there needs to be representation from this, or somebody's doing this cool thing. And so we have invited guests sometimes, and then we also have invited members. We do 2 virtual meetings, so it's easy to have a lot more guests at a virtual meeting than it is at an in-person space. And so sometimes our virtual meetings so far has felt like they were a little broader. We also focus on sometimes education, very education and professional development. What do we need to learn more about? And then other times we're focused more on process, right? On what we're doing as a community of practice and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think
Let's go to Taylor, who's about to come to her first meeting and just got her orientation. Welcome to group.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. The way we sort of got there, in addition to sort of the quorum question, and then sort of who the coordinator, the executive team is that we volunteered. That's why we did it. Because we said, we'll do this. And what that means is that we find a place and we buy lunch. And we tell people to come to the meeting, or if that's the Carrie wedding, and Carrie to see them in the meeting. So that's really,
and we meet every other week. We meet, the executive team meets more frequently, and then the whole group comes together quarterly. So yeah.
And to be clear, frequently ask others if they would like to join the executive group.
And advocate for people to join those sub teams as well. We're also, our priority group areas, we're often saying, we would love to have people that wanted to help with training.
So CCN, I think it's fair to say, is relatively it's like and I say this in terms of like development, it's not a very old network, as compared to the folks that are up here on the panel with me. So, I believe the think tanks that I was talking to you guys about before and how we landed with standing up the structure of CCN started in, I believe, 2019. And they did a bunch of work. These leaders came together. The hub is really strong with convening, and so there was a lot of interest and support to stand this network up to bridge the gaps that we talked about before with bringing folks out of silos and highlighting some of the positive work that's happening and putting some vision and collective voice that hopefully is representative across the state to what the future of community development looks like for West Virginia. So these think tanks, they landed with the structure to develop the steering committee is by election. So coming up here, probably October or November, there will actually be a couple of seats open. And I'm sure we'll have room for this a little bit later, but just so you know what's in front of you, that QR code there, it will link you to the landing page for CCN, which lives on the Hub's website because the Hub is a host organization for CCN. I say that because CCN is working to further develop its identity beyond the Hub, even to the point of being open to partnerships for other lead organizations that could help grow the capacity of the network. So at the moment, there's been some backing by like Benedum in the past, and the Hub allocates resources that are built into the network, but there is no specific capacity building resource that's dedicated to the network at the moment. I think that's important to say because there's room for growth there. Right now, the steering committee that exists there's a 15-member steering committee. Carrie just stepped off last year. Outside of that steering committee, there are also 2 working groups. The steering committee meets 4 times a year, so pretty much quarterly. And then 2 of those are virtual, 2 are in person. We try to have them in different places across the state because this is supposed to be a truly inclusive statewide network. And we do not want to create barriers for the public to be able to join all the way up to the steering committee. One of the focuses that I didn't touch on earlier is kind of the leadership development portion of CCN, which is also something that I really enjoy because it's one of the only groups where I sit in the room with research practitioners who do this all day for the last 15, 20 years, but also new and upcoming entrepreneurs who have scaled up their own organizations and are leaders in their own community and can kind of help speak to that work and kind of in that diverse professional setting. So yeah, the work groups, they meet monthly, virtually. I'm a co-lead, and actually Kaylee is too, for the engagement working group. It's actually called Building Community and Connections. I shorten it to engagement all the time because that's just too many words. And the other working group is the policy group that is actually shared with DAW. One of the things that I noticed when I came on about a year ago, and I will say there was some impact in 2020, of course, that kind of had an impact on the momentum, I'll say. And I think that what happens is when you're trying to do systems level work and be able to see the outcomes bubble up from the community level, you need to be able to engage with community members, and doing that in a virtual way from the level of the steering committee became difficult throughout COVID. And so the strategies that we're focusing on now are more public facing. Hopefully in the upcoming year, you will see a learning library be launched that is open to the public to learn when we have our steering committee meetings. The 16 community development sectors that have been defined to date have been kind of prioritized by the steering committee. So we host learning sessions and ask subject matter experts to come in around these different community development fields, and we capture that information that will go into a learning bank that should be accessible to the public, hopefully in 2024. steering committee hasn't landed on a date for that yet. The other thing that is being discussed is kind of a mentor-mentee platform that the hub would sort of provide some quality assurance over, but to be able to foster connections between community members and thought leaders or people with expertise to help nurture new and upcoming leaders that want to be able to create change in their own communities. So again, one of my favorite things is just that it's very asset based, but in terms of structure, there was a lot of focus on just processes and structure and, you know, kind of how we're going to do this thing for the first 2 years. Now that we have the network stood up, it's sort of not only how are we going to do this in terms of managing the network, but how are we going to do this in terms of impacting the entire state across all these community development fields. So yeah, that's where we are in terms of structure. There's no real quorum when it comes to decision making. It's kind of a majority rules deal, simply because the quorum requires a certain number of people to come. And as Perry stated, most folks are doing this in their volunteer time. Now, CCN does offer a stipend for our meetings for every steering committee member. We try to do that to create equity so that people who aren't doing this as a part of their day-to-day work can justify spending 4 hours in a meeting outside of their day-to-day work life to help make decisions that will impact the state moving forward. I think beyond that, I think there's room for some shifting, and I'm looking to see what will happen next year. I believe that there's room for more fun in the network, to be honest, to gather people to kind of celebrate some of the wins that are happening across the state and do that in a way that is an effective use of data. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the structure shift in a way that aligns with the capacity of the network and the purpose of the network.
We're gonna go a different direction now. A lot of structure here. I think we're the non-structured group. So how Cabin arose is in that, I think it's 2016, is that right? Yeah, by the Kentucky Brownfields coordinator saying, we need to talk more. And that is where we are, and that is what we do. And we do. It's so a successful mission. So we just started getting together. We had some calls early on. This was pre-pandemic, virtual meetings. They were literally holding up to your ear calls, which seems like ages ago. And
People.
there were a lot of people.
That's not that way on the phone anymore. Literally, the emails had 40 emails on the block. They were hard.
Yeah.
The calls were long, were a lot. Yeah, so we had a lot of folks on calls early on, and then the group perhaps whittled a bit and honed a smidge. So, this really the core group was, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. We've expanded super excitingly to Ohio, South Carolina, and am I missing anybody? And North Carolina. So that's been really exciting. So we're really covering the very vast majority of that. It's extremely democratic. We meet on calls, I'd say periodically, virtually now as needed throughout the year, and really try to do one in-person event each year. There yesterday, and we try to tag onto a conference because this is completely volunteer and extra in our day jobs, but we love it so much. I know I'm personally happy to take it. But it's a great group of people. How we're structured is we're really not, instead we're democratic. And we really rely on Carrie so very much for really pulling everybody together and honing and focusing for what we want to address and how we want to work forward throughout the year.
And I think, that group is completely volunteer. It's me and all of the folks from each of those states are from the state environmental agencies, which I think is also incredibly unique thing. And has survived retirement and people moving in new faces, and so that's really exciting. Her people was all together, retired shortly thereafter. But we do it for her.
And we still managed to grow, which I think is
Yeah.
astounding, you know, staff changes and such.
And
Sometimes
you
you
really don't.
just want to maintain status quo. But we've managed to grow with a lot of staff changes.
So, great. So, I mean, you want to see the cheat sheet? Not here. So we talked a little bit about structure. We heard a little bit about how all of these things are added. And I think to Paula's point, this is just something about this is volunteering as extra. So how is it extra? Right? So Paula's job is brownfields, my job is brownfields. So how is cabin more than just your? Why is it not your job just being in cabin? What's the value add?
So just clarification, so I'm with the state of Tennessee. I work similar to what Erin does in West Virginia, and Erin's staff, just kind of give perspective what I do in my day-to-day. I work with communities all across our states, really just build capacity and support them in redeveloping the brownfields in their community for their goals on their timeline. And provide what we're saying, supporting part of it. So this for me, I think I review a lot of my job. I'm on a lot of virtual meetings, I'm on a lot of calls, I'm cheerleading brownfield redevelopment. For me, this kind of pulls me out of my micro lens into a macro lens, because I think we can just get caught up, at least I can, in the day-to-day of, okay, I have a lot of reports to review. Okay, I got some voice notes to return. You just kind of get in that, let's just power through this, let's get through it, let's do what we need to do. This pulls me back, so I think bigger. And that's a huge value add. I think if anybody can be involved in this room in something bigger that refrain out of what's immediately in front of them, just do it. So for me, it's been incredibly helpful to build that peer network when I have someone that approached me from my state that I don't necessarily have the answer, but I know one of our cabin people will, and I can pick up the phone and we can connect them and get them a solution.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to see more recently. We have is the emails that go out. They're like, hey guys, we're updating our guidance on this part of our VOP program. What y'all do? And then everybody's like, here's ours, here's ours, here's ours. Or Paula has this really great report that their economic development arm did on like the impact of redevelopment, and then we like send it around and West Virginia, wish that our economic development group would do something like that. Right. And so it's just like those resources that they're sharing amongst each other, which is really exciting.
It's kind of a past. I'm going to say something else that I will give the mic up. But thinking about, what is cabin is, we work conferences like this, which is the best part. And a couple of years ago, I had a gentleman from Northeast Tennessee, very rural, very geographically divided community, mountains, hills, ravines, rivers. It's hard to get somewhere not even close to a straight line. And he's working on horticulture on some landscape lands. Awesome. He wanted funding for education. Hey, that's a lane that I just frankly haven't been in. I'm the technical person. And so I reached out to the cabinet crew and I got a list of ideas that I could share with him. And so that to me was huge, because I don't know how long it will, but reaching out to this brain trust to support these communities that we've not been.
Sure. So, yeah, CCN, I feel this is not a paid ad here, but I feel pretty lucky to be able to be in spaces that kind of merge all of the positive things that are happening around the state and some of the strength-based skill sets of not only myself, but the people around the group and some of the other staff members, really. One of the things I think about CCN that is just like a natural value add, when I came on, similar to what you just said a moment ago about just being able to pull from other folks. In our last steering committee meeting, I'll just use this as an example. The learning focus was community capacity building, which is just a broad topic. I mean, it's just, so we had everybody we know that does community capacity building come in and talk about it. Everybody from brownfields and, physical built environment redevelopment deals to the hub's coaching work, which is really just a people first kind of approach to community planning projects and that kind of a thing. And lots of folks in between. What we recognized really quickly and what I knew coming into this thing is that it's great to try to bring people out of silos and impact an entire system across an entire state with mountains, rivers, ravines, and you can almost get nowhere in a straight line here in West Virginia either. However, it is such a big ask. What does that look like? Doesn't mean we have to be experts in every field of community development. What it means is that we have to pull on what we know about, and these people are the thought leaders in the state for community development in West Virginia. And so and I'll just kind of throw this out there as some context about myself. I bring kind of a public health lens to everything. And one of the things that the hub has encouraged me to do, and particularly in these spaces of coordination, is to keep kind of a 10,000-foot view of where I can bring some of these impactful interactions between networks together, capture that synergy, and align it with funding priorities to build the capacity of what we're doing. So we just kind of looked at what we were talking about across what makes a thriving community. And in my mind, I come from, again, I'm a licensed therapist and run a clinic and all of that outside of the hub. And so I immediately come from this public health approach. And I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of the 5 social determinants of health, or what makes up a thriving community. And there's all these social conditions that go into that include physical built wealth and, access to different, what they call good products. So healthy food, good schools, good jobs, whatever that looks like, tourism, fun at your river, whatever that looks like. I'm not an expert in any of that, but I do know that if I talk to Ray at Brownfields, he can come out and assess a site or tell somebody how to do that. There are other networks that are focused wholly on these things. So how does CCN sort of be the convener? How do we create synergy between these statewide networks and coalitions and bring them all together to say, hey, we're all having this conversation. How can we help one another, rather than restarting the conversation every time we're all in a different meeting? So CCN has really been a place where I've been able to not just kind of bring my other skill sets into a room where I'm able to, make something tangible happen out of that, but ask others to do that in the same way for West Virginia. And, as a homegrown West Virginian that will be here for the long haul, that feels really good. So.
And I think what I'm thinking about what I think I've heard Steve say on the CTN about not ever being in a room with this group of people. I think of the groups here, CCN is the most diversity of background and experience, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just environmental, it's not just property based, it's not just community development and TDs and APC are pretty diverse too, but it's still all very real estate focused, right? And property focused.
Yeah.
CCN is about community development, which means a lot of things. And so I think I certainly enjoyed that when I was on the committee, and I definitely have to see anything in Maria that was saying how to name real about anywhere. So
Yeah.
I just want to be in the room with all these great smart people and learn from you guys. So I think that's a really great thing for CCN does.
No, it's a huge value add to just, like you said, be in a room with diverse folks. And from a facilitator standpoint, it is very fun to watch passions rise and people talk about their projects. And then you'll, hear pushback from practitioners who do it from a different lens every day. And so I get to sort of be I don't even know, the referee in that room. And so until we land on a positive strategy that we all agree on, and sometimes that doesn't look like a really easy conversation, but it is. And just as an example, last year when I hosted the elections, there were over 50 applications for people who wanted to be steering committee members across the state. I'm talking about government leaders, executive directors, entrepreneurs, again, very diverse. And sometimes you just don't see that kind of equitable kind of collective voice be able to, that conversation doesn't happen in one room often. So again, that's the value add that I see with CCN.
When I think about value add, like why do I keep doing APC stuff? I didn't have to take it with me when I went, but I wanted to. I advocated for that. I love, this is a part of my job that gives me joy. And when I think about why, it is really the reason why I do any of this work at all. I mean, I believe that West Virginians deserve strong, thriving communities. And I believe that the properties that are causing them problems can be the foundation on which we build those strong, thriving communities. I really believe that. And so for me, that's why I keep engaging APC. I think that like many of the folks in the room are deep, deep into this work, years and years into the work of brownfield redevelopment, community development, economic development, all of this stuff, and they're there for a very similar why. And I think that, you know, similarly to what Alicia said, it's really, it keeps that burnout at bay when you get to sit in a room with a bunch of people who are there for the same why that you're there. And I think that's really powerful in terms of the work that we're doing with APC. I think part of the value add is a results value add. Carrie, I think you mentioned this before, a lot of our member organizations can't lobby. And kind of have to take a really delicate line around advocacy and how they're talking to elected officials, if they're talking to elected officials at all. So what we're able to do through the Urbana Properties Coalition is have these really grounded, rooted in the work, in the daily work sort of suggestions for our legislators. And we're able to say, this is an Abandoned Properties Coalition initiative. This isn't a Carry at and back initiative. This isn't a Taylor at Land Stewardship initiative or Alicia at the Hub initiative. This is an Abandoned Properties Coalition initiative. And so nobody kind of has to stand out with the cold all by themselves, being the one person advocating for the thing. We're all standing there together, and it sort of, you know, we have the power of our collective voice, but also it builds a little bit of a hedge in between, you know, some concerns about perhaps engaging too deeply in advocacy work for organizations. I think that's a really big value add. We're able to see some real policy change. So, you know, and I think that's a value add, right? Our policy successes, the things that we won are a big value add. You know, we made that tax sale process better. There is demolition money that's available in West Virginia now. Those are things that came about because of many years of APC advocacy. And that's not, I mean, I am a registered lobbyist. I do a lot of the lobbying for the Abandoned Properties Coalition, but that's not me, guys. Like that's the coalition as a whole. Everybody worked together to get that done. And so, you know, those successes are a huge value add, I think, and that's the purpose of the coalition as a whole, is to make the work easier by doing that systems level change. And then I think the last thing that I'd say about value add is like exactly what Paula said, which is that, like, I don't know how to do that. I know somebody who knows how to do that. And we can get you where you need to go to figure out the challenges that you're having in your community, or, you know, whatever. And so I think that for me, when you stack all of those pieces of value on top of each other, there's just no reason why I don't want to quit doing APC stuff. I like it. And in addition to, you know, finding a lot of joy in it, it really does make a huge difference for the folks that participate, and for folks that, you know, don't participate with us too. I've had a bunch of people come up to me and be like, "Oh, hey, have you read this report?" Yeah, I helped write that report. Or, you know, folks will say, you know, did you know that there's a bunch of money at DP now for demolition? Didn't know that, but I'm so glad that you're able to use that. You know? So, and I think it's a mark of success too when you're hearing from other people that they're benefiting from it, and they don't even know that you were connected with it at all. And you know, that's where we would love to sit as APC, is to see many people across the state benefiting from the systemic change that we're able to make at the Capitol.
Oh, that's so fast. I would say that that bit about policy and the hedge is why that's the most structured group. Yeah, that was very important to us to say, what does it mean that APC supports this? Right? What does it mean that my name is on the APC website that says we support this? And how do we make sure that we are only doing things that our coalition supports whole hog, right? And not, right? And we haven't had to in practice. So I love processing you write bylaws for when things go wrong. They haven't, but you have to be ready for, like, what if we had a policy that we weren't sure about? Sorry, to keep going. But that's why it is the most structured, right? Like, all of these groups are doing amazing things, and Cabin has so much fun, but we're not we're not advocating for policy change, and we don't have to have structure, and so we don't have to. We can just plan real portrait. We don't need bylaws to plan real portrait.
That's exactly right. A really great example of this is the fact that we use Robert's rules in all of our meetings, okay? So we've got a quorum and we got to call the meeting to order and somebody's got to take minutes and all of this stuff. And we're following all of these really sort of structured requirements. But just like Carrie said, like, we make all our decisions by consensus. We don't have to, but we do. And that's just kind of the culture of the group that we've created. But it is incredibly important to have all of those really structured pieces, so that when folks come back, why are you advocating for that? Well, here's our process. And so our structure and our process are what we can point to say, you know, it wasn't just the Taylor's Great Ideas show. You know what I mean?
All right, so what is the value add for dog in my day-to-day work and life? Actually, I thought of several. It's amazing when I have a little bit of time, what comes into my brain. Anyway, I thought of, I love what Paula said about how it took her from kind of microscopic day-to-day to macro. But for me, dog is a little bit of the opposite. It takes me a little bit down into the grassroots work that's going on in West Virginia, and I get to hear about that. And I get to think about creative ways to connect that work to other work that I'm doing. So for me, dog takes the theory that I hear about for redevelopment, and I get to see real applications of it and case studies and real examples, and I get to meet the people involved in that, and that makes it very real for me. And so I love that component of it in my work. And then I love the way that that then enables me to connect that to other pieces and other people and other parts of my work. Recently, the hub's doing some work in Eastern Kentucky, and that team was talking about wanting a food truck incubator program, and I want to connect them to Jim Spencer and Bluefield, who I met because of dog, because of that connection. And so just knowing about those actual, because most of the time, practitioners might love hearing the theory and all of that, but most of the time the people doing the boots on the ground work want an example, and they want like a show me somebody else doing it and how they did it, and what they, you know, where their challenges were. And I feel like dog lets me be in the room with the people that are doing that. And so that's a great value add for me. And then dog is just fun. Dog is so fun. Yeah, the value add for me is that I started at the hub and got to immediately immerse myself in a group that was thoroughly enjoying what they were doing, and you could tell that they were enjoying it from day one. And that made me, was already excited about the job, but that made me love it even more. And it helps me end my day on a very positive note just by being in that space. So yeah, that's value.
That's great. And I think the only thing I would add from dog is that earlier Ben talked about how we have sort of half of our meetings talk about we learn together, so we hear an example or we hear about an approach in West Virginia or in Appalachia, or sometimes not. And then the other half of our meetings are focused on the system, the downtown revitalization system. And one of the reasons for that is that we figured out, even in my staff that participates in it, that some of us are there for one of those value adds and some of us are there for the other value add. And that we wanted all of the people there, and that both of those things are valid. And so if we structure it that way, to our point about if you're here when you're supposed to be here, you can make a decision. That may not be the only way to make a decision. We also get to go to really cool places like West Virginia, that's the other value add. But you can, like, I like to learn from people. That's not my popular, right? Like, I'm learning from people all the time, but the systems, I've already talked about process, that piece is what really gets me going. And I am lucky enough to be in a position where I am learning from those people all the time, because it is my job to find out what other people are doing and make those connections. And so for me, it is that systems. For Ray on my staff, if we could just have cool examples all the time, he'd be happy, right? And he put them together and they would be magical, and they always are. But he's the systems, he's like care of it. So it's important to us to have that, to feed both of those things, I think. So we have a couple more questions. We're going to talk a little bit about some examples of success, and we've heard some of them. We've touched on this a little little bit, so instead of going down the line, I want to talk about how you're funded, how this work is funded. And so I want everybody who has direct funding for this work to raise their hand. Okay, so how many money? Having got $4,000 in 2016, it was a sponsorship for the first summit, which we used to call the Central Appalachian Regional Gravel Summit. Central Appalachian Regional Gravel Summit. Cars. And Vince was like, we're not doing that anymore. So now it's called the Cabin Summit. And really that's where we started, right? And Herb said, it can't just be a conference. It has to be more than that, right? So ARC gave us $4,000 for that first thing. We used it to do some scholarships. And when we partner with conferences like this, sometimes the cabin piece will be an add-on and you can like pay $25 to come to the summit. And then that goes into a dedicated account managed by us. And we use that for scholarships. So there's some folks here from other states that got travel scholarships to be here, and that's relevant. That's how we work. Downtown Appalachia, we'll talk about the successes a little bit. Had the Downtown Appalachia big umbrella has some different funded components, but really the working group doesn't have. Yeah. Sometimes we buy lunch, and sometimes y'all buy lunch. I just scrape it together. I don't know what I think Stephanie does. We just scrape it together. It's only 25 people we buy lunch at the home fund every couple months, but yeah, I think that's basically. I think Alicia talked a little bit. There was money at the beginning to get it moving, to get it started. I think some other people in the room probably participated in those meetings. But the point of that is that you can do this without a lot. Yeah. I mean, Kevin will get as soon as I figure out who I can get to give us the money, we'll get it done. But I haven't figured out. It's only been 7 years. Okay, well, before I go into next, are there any other questions in the room? Or thoughts? We have some other members of this group in the room.
I'm just curious. Sorry, didn't even jump into facilitator mode, but who in the room is a part of any of these groups? I'm just
Cabin crew.
Okay.
DA crew.
Okay. Serious. I'm gonna get to work with Kay.
You can raise your hand because you can participate with AC3.
She's on the student. Yeah, she's a member of our constituency as defined in our bylaws. Yeah.
And maybe you all could speak to the personality of your group. It seems to me you've got a lot of ideas coming into the think tank. There's some discussion. Is there a limit on that discussion before a decision can be made? Because it seems like you can get lost in discussion forever in this process.
He's been listening to our meeting.
Okay, I'm gonna go first because my answer is short. The legislative session starts in January.
Gotcha.
So if we don't get our acts together, we actually, I have made a system where we have set agendas for every meeting. Of course, we can always add additional topics if there's new stuff we want to talk about. But I know that in quarter four meeting is the approval of draft legislation. So if we don't settle, if our teams don't settle on an idea, that quarter three is our approval of policy initiatives. Okay, you don't have to have draft legislation done by them, but you do have to have a plan. And so, you know, that external timeline is a lot of what guides our decision making. Other decision making stuff is more organic, and we make a decision about it when we feel like we have exhausted the conversation about it. But that external timeline does impose a little bit of necessity for us to sort of wrap up our conversations.
I would say for Kevin, there's a much lower stakes external timeline, which is sometimes we put in a proposal to a call for sessions and we have to decide what we want to do. And it's usually, let's do something together. What's our theme this time? Okay, I'm on it. And then Paula raises it for me.
Oh, no. I think the external timelines are completely helpful.
Yeah, they are.
Because then that does focus and hone and say, okay, who is our audience? How can we best connect with them? And what are the needs? What are the needs in the room? And we felt like, you know, the small technical assistance grant, which we talked about yesterday's plenary, is frankly, I don't know if it's real well known. You know, so we wanted to talk about that small resources to tap into and then give you who to talk to in your state. So I think external timelines are also incredibly helpful.
I think that when I joined,
I think
Yeah,
that
she
I
did.
would have help with that part
Yeah,
of it.
she did.
I do push the group with an agenda and I do push the group with decision making and I do say, hey, we need to decide this, we need to put this, we need to have. So sometimes I think it's people and it's important to include people in these networks that have a variety of skills and can bring.
Yeah, including testing people. to
What?
places.
Yeah, I'm putting that part of it, because I can be like, what are you guys gonna do? Let's all agree. I also think that the reason that we need that, especially in docking, is that so many of us are doing so many other things together that you get a call, you're like, oh, Taylor, I need to talk to you about 16 other things real fast. And then
Every call.
everybody else, because someone comes like, are we supposed to be talking about planning? Why are they talking about this behavior? So I think it's helpful, because we all know that like 10 people or whatever, like 10 people are doing 8% of the work, and that's the people that are on these groups. And so then you get on there and you're like, oh, we haven't talked about the other thing. Do you want to hang from? Taylor and I are, that's probably our question. Do you want to hang from?
I will say, when you ask that question, I try to look at Taylor, like, you know, things you've been telling about our group sessions or?
She said it, I want to know.
No, I say that because, and I'm gonna play devil's advocate a little bit here and be fully transparent, particularly from the viewpoint of CCN, because although, two things, speaking to your question and the last thing that Carrie said about the funding portion, I'm gonna be honest, I think you can do this work with no money. I think that if the impact is there and the value add is there, and you're able to measure that, collect that, speak to that, then you're gonna get some resources to build the capacity of what you're doing. I am the queen of building a plane and flying it at the same time. That's what I've done with every program I've ever ran, every job I've ever created for myself, because I like to see the tangible results of the conversations that are happening. When I came on to CCN and what's happening currently is there's sort of this 10,000 foot view. I've tried to stay in because of the buy-in that I have with the work and the connection to the work, and Kaylee and I joke all the time, we eat, sleep, and dream networks, right? So I just think about what makes this work, what does, what isn't working all day long, every day. And one of the things that I think CCN is really struggling with is the amount of time, and I know COVID did have an impact on that, that was spent in standing up the network. There's a wide listserv across the state, and every meeting I'm saying, how are we serving these people? They are hungry for information from the network. We've been in existence for this amount of time. And so although there is this passionate discussion, although there is this passionate discussion, I am often saying, okay, but if you want to have this mentor-mentee thing, what's that really look like? What's a date for this thing? What criteria need to be met? I'm often putting together facilitation strategies that include feedback. I have an open slide on every presentation I do to say, hey, what's the answer to A, B, and C? Because when I came in, there were a lot of surveys that were going out that weren't getting any response. There was a lot of discussion that was happening on, what kind of infrastructure the network itself needed. But in terms of the value to the state, the impact that the network is making, I do believe that at some point you do need to build the capacity of what you're doing in order to sustain the work. And if you want those meetings to be a good, effective use of time, you need to get something out of those meetings when people are coming to spend time in those meetings. Yeah.
I want that. Bringing out these conversations, there are a lot of things thinking and a lot of, here's the ideas, here's what we want to do and all of that. It's really important to have one person really dedicated to leading the conversation and driving to that beginning, which is the thought process, to the end, which is the outcome. And having one person that sometimes it's organic and it naturally arises, and it's usually me on a lot of them. But having someone dedicated, that's like Alicia, she's the one that is really driving this. So, having someone that can be cognizant throughout the conversation, say, okay, we're getting off track and it's time to bring us back to the purpose why we're here, and recognizing this is what we want to come out of this meeting with. Either it's a deadline or it's a plan or whatever it is, but being able to be cognizant of that and have some person keep you accountable, because as the rest of us are thinking and ideating and all of that stuff, it's easy to kind of let that take over and be intentional.
And it can have a negative impact on the value of what you're doing. And there's lots of networks going on, lots of program work that needs, someone who is, fully dedicated and attentive. And if, at least from my viewpoint, and this is kind of what those internal evaluative conversations look like, we need measurable milestones. If we don't have small wins to speak to, if we're not building the momentum of what we're doing, you got to recognize that sometimes systems work fails. And that's just the truth. Would I be happy that over the last 4 years or however long, that no, you don't want it to fail, but you do need to recognize that so that you're able to either re-energize and, re-strategize, or close it up and move on to the next network or system that has bubbled up. So
One of the things that I'm hearing, Paul said that, oh, it's an informal group and everything, but there's a lot of formality to it to be able to get to an endpoint decision. And somebody needs to drive that, or you're just gonna discuss it for 5 years and never reach it. And that's part of the problem that I see in a lot of these local communities, is they talk about stuff or they study the hell out of it, but there's never any endpoint decision made. And that's where I think you all can help guide these communities to help them get to an endpoint.
Well, that's what really, from my perspective, and when I was pushing this towards what became the community practice in Appalachia was, I kept saying, but why is it different from the funded work to the projects? How is it different what we're doing in this room? If we're just talking about the projects that we're already something to do, that's something else, and that's valuable, but that's not, is this something different? Who are we to each other? That was the question, right? Who are we to each other? What are we doing here? What does it mean to be here? And how do we do it? And something that I think part of it was because of 2020 and 2021, and I can remember having this conversation with Lacey before Alicia, and then also in downtown Appalachia, and I've been having it internally myself over is what is actually doable? What are we be kind to ourselves as the ones who are volunteering to do this? Like, yes, we need to completely overhaul the structure and the system of downtown revitalization and how we support that ecosystem in West Virginia, but we're not going to do it in the next quarter. So what are we going to do in the next quarter? What can I commit to do in the next quarter? And it's okay that it is not a system change in the next 3 months, right? It is to start building definitions so that we all are having the same conversation. Yeah, I can do that in 3 months, right? What is happening? And right, and there was a point where an APC, if you come with a team, you're saying, I'm going to be on this team and I'm going to help form this team. You can't say, y'all have to really do something about code enforcement. And then step away. That's my example, because we thought we needed a code enforcement team for a long time, but nobody wanted to be on the same team. It's not very safe. And so, right? But like, and it's okay if that means it's not, that means it's not a priority. If nobody has the time to give to it, that means it's not a priority, and that's okay.
I think that's another thing. It's like if you have to have a good way for stuff to organically fall off when it's not the right choice, or to rest and lay over. So for example, like there's a threshold in APC of like, you have to have a like clearly articulated policy objective by the Q3 meeting. If you don't, it doesn't mean you have a bad idea. Maybe it means that there's not enough people that are interested in it right now, and that's fine. Or maybe it means that we need to do more research so that we can figure out, what exactly are we asking for? What change are we really looking for here? And it is quite common for, like, I don't want you to think that like every year we get a full slate of policy objectives and it's perfect, and all of the objectives that we thought of during the year were transitioned. That is not it at all. We love all of them. Yeah, the legislature loves all of them, and they buy me dinner. No, that's not how any of this works. How it does work though is that, we've got teams that are throwing around ideas. They're having conversations every month. Those monthly conversations are addressing like, I had this problem this month, this thing came up. We're, distilling those into policy ideas that I'm bouncing back at them, that I'm reflecting back at them at each of their monthly meetings. Okay, I heard you say at the last meeting this. Is this what you really want? Do we really? And the stuff that sticks around is the stuff that we start pursuing. And some of those things don't end up with a fully fleshed out idea. And many of them lay over until the next year. While we do some research or we do some community engagement or we do some education or, whatever it is it's gonna take for those ideas to get more fully fleshed out. This meeting that we just had is a great example of that. I hosted some meetings about the same study we were talking about today 5 years ago. And nothing materialized. The coalition as a whole kind of said, I don't know that this is the right time for us to be addressing this. And now that somebody is interested and feels like they might want to be a leader on a team, we're able to kind of bring some resources back around. And so I think that equally important to a decision-making process is a formal or informal, I don't know that we ever articulated this. This isn't in our bylaws or anything. But having a process where you can say, you can press pause on an idea for a while, when there isn't, because we would all die under the weight of trying to throw 100% of our effort behind every single thing that's in front of us. And so, It's all important. And it's all important, all of it. And so being able to sort of strategically select, where are we seeing some movement? And it's true particularly with APC, because for example, if the policy change that you would like to have happen this year includes the word tax in any way at all, I'm very sorry for you, but that is not going to happen. And so kind of we also have to flex to political appetite because of the type of work that we're doing. And I imagine it's pretty similar for other networks. You're just flexing to a different type of appetite that you have to be conscious of that exists in the environment around you as well.
Well, we definitely have to be considerate of the climate to watch, to know what is feasible, really. Some things are just not even worth putting your time into if it's not feasible. The other thing I think that's been really important to me in the role of the coordinator, particularly from the hub, because the hub identifies as facilitators. This is what we do. And so we go into the meeting with the idea of what we want to get out of it and make sure that we have that takeaway to distill that information and try to manage that kind of brainstorming cloud that you were speaking to before, just getting lost in discussion kind of a thing. I think that once you're able to, for me, it's super important again to understand what your measurable impact is as a network and what your scope is, because I'm not trying to do all the policy work that APC is doing, but I do have a policy group, right? And so the policy group's successes look different than the engagement group successes, but as a network, we celebrate those successes together. And so the meaningful kind of idea planning work is happening in those monthly work group meetings. And then when we get into that sometimes 4-hour steering committee meeting, we say, hey, this is what we got. Do you give me a thumbs up, yes, or a thumbs up, down, no? And we make those decisions in that moment. And so I think that is one of the sort of the protections are built into the structure of the network, and try to, you learn more as you go. And so you try to build those in continuously.
Thank you for that. All right, we have about 15 minutes left. It's an important watch update. I'll show you. So I want to make sure we have time to talk about our last two sort of pieces. And the first one is, luckily we all have more than one, but I want you to pick one because we have 2 minutes. Example of a success that has come out of this partnership, and how you decide which one to choose.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of easy for me for this because Downtown Appalachia Working Group has these 2 initiatives I'm aware of that are grant funded with the Downtown Appalachia Revitalizing Recreation Economy, which is there, which I work with as well. And so that is an ARC funded program that funds the pre-development technical assistance for 8 Long Forest towns. And I'm not going to say a whole lot more on the time restriction. And then there's another one, Downtown Appalachia REI, and I forget what that stands for. And a partner, PCAP, oversees that portion of it. And so
there were 2 more before that. We talked before about we got thrown because there was money. It was in the first power grant open. Mary Hunt said, y'all better get it together and put in a power grant application to get it and to get funded. Then we try to.
Yeah, so Dog has some very clear, funded, powerful success examples, and, we're on a short time frame, so I'm gonna hand it to Taylor.
Possible.
Just one.
I know, that's what.
Well, I'll tell you about, the tax sale process, because that's more interesting. Who would have ever thought that I would, like,
On the planet Earth.
we helped with demo funding in, the first allocation of demo funding in West Virginia state history, demolition funding for communities across state.
Which was our goal from the beginning and took 10 years. Just to clarify that this
10
is
years.
not fast work.
Nope.
Yeah.
But that's not the story I'll tell you, because that one was summed up in one sentence. And this is a more fun story. So I don't know how much everybody knows about the process of selling property tax debt in West Virginia. You don't have to know anything about it to understand the story. Suffice it to say that the process where, you know, if you don't pay your taxes, what happens to your property? That process was very long and was contributing in a really major way to property vacancy and abandonment. Okay. We worked a long time ago with a national partner called Center for Community Progress to produce a report that demonstrated the negative effect that the tax sale process was having on property abandonment and dilapidation. And then that report sat there for, like, we tried to take it to the auditor, and the auditor was like, yeah, whatever. And then we tried, you know, here it is, we're showing it around to everybody who will listen to us, which was no one. And it sat there for, I don't know, 3 years-ish, until the kid of one of the people on our team.
This is a West Virginia story.
This is why I'm telling you, because it's a really fun, very West Virginia story. So Crystal was on our team. We love Crystal. Crystal's son, Zach, got hired as an intern in the state auditor's office. And Crystal said to her son, you are a good son. Put this report in the auditor's desk. And he did. And so the auditor came back to us and said, have you heard about this report? And we said, tell us more. And so through that partnership, we were able to, first of all, develop a really successful, positive relationship with the West Virginia State Auditor's Office. But we were also able to suggest a bunch of the changes that were in the report. The report had suggested, I don't know, like 30 policy changes that needed to be made in order for the tax sale process to not be so horrible. And then 2 years ago, I think about 10 or 12 of those changes made it into a sort of omnibus reformation of the tax sale process called Senate Bill 552. We got that passed. And it most notably included less time that properties sit in weird limbo between when somebody is, you know, responsible for maintaining the property and when it can pass to somebody else. The second thing it did is it cut down the amount of money that speculators can make on this process. So it stopped being a get-rich-quick scheme for folks forming LLCs from out of state, profiting off the backs of West Virginians. And it also, really importantly, included a hardship clause where if you can't pay your taxes because you're having a real financial problem, there's a way for you to make payments now. And there never was before. And so those are some three really, really important things that happened as a result of this major success. And they're still trying to implement this now. And so we're calling it a success, but we're still living in the realm of like trying to see what exactly the impacts of that success is going to be over the next 10 or 15 years. So, but that's a huge one. And we've been working on that for as long as I've been a part of APC and definitely longer even than I've been with the coalition. Oh. I'll just say, yeah.
Are you? Muskie had said, he didn't at the last one I went to last sale. Aren't they supposed to be offering that to communities first?
There's
a they auction it so that the towns have the money or the local.
Yeah, so no, not quite, almost. So included in this, we can talk more offline about tax sale ins and outs if you want to. I didn't know I was going to be the I didn't grow up thinking I was gonna be the tax. Communities get right of last refusal. So if it doesn't sell at the tax sale, you've got first dibs on it before it goes onto the no bid list at the auditor's office.
Every question about.
Yeah, and I'm happy to after the session.
Yeah, I'll just be really quick, just keeping in mind that CCN again is kind of a baby network as compared to everyone else on the panel. When I first came to the hub, my very first presentation was just to introduce CCN to the public. That was not even a year ago yet. And so that was exciting to finally just get the network out. Since then, we've been able to grow the listserv to roughly 200 folks. We've grown the working groups, and I think that's really important if you want to build capacity beyond the steering committee. So we've been able to do that. I wish that Brian were here, our policy coordinator. He's had some really strong wins and work happening out of the policy group. Just recently, him and our executive director, Stephanie Tyree, has participated, kind of led a roundtable with NRGDA in DC, I believe. They've been able to make some really strong connections with and build some relationships with policy and lawmakers on the Hill, as Brian likes to say, and he's there right now. He actually him and Stephanie drove to DC last night to do some of this work. And so that discussion was around some of the legislation that is impacting childcare and how that impacts workability across the state, which is interesting because it bleeds into some of the work that I coordinate with through the Rural Partners Network that the Hub also provides backbone support for. So CCN is creating some synergy between some of these networks. The wins that I think you can expect to see is how we impact the network members themselves across the state through some of the engagement strategies that we talked about before. So we'll see.
I think I want to go really small here. When I say just really people level, this is not big picture, but I think it results in big picture. So I had a couple of young and vibrant economic developers from utility district in Appalachian East Tennessee, very small community, who were kind of interested in brownfields. I thought, okay, I like this. I like where we're going with this. And we had multiple conversations, and I thought, I think they can really change makers in our community. There they are, but not the brownfield scope, but they can be. And so we were able to get them a scholarship to attend a conference like this. And so it was in Southwest Virginia, so not very far from Northeast Tennessee, and they were able to attend. And now they are brownfields ambassadors. And one of them has now switched roles to work for our state economic development agency. That's awesome. So
How is it filtering all of the little other non-brownfields?
and so now we have these brownfield advocates, not only in the local communities, but moving up through various agencies in the state that may not be the natural fit you would think of the environmental arm, but it absolutely is economic development with brownfields. So I think that to me is the cavern, is connecting people to be these brownfields ambassadors to support and facilitate the reuse, no matter where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
Mic drop. So my last question, and then I'll give your lunch now, is, so if I want to engage with any of these organizations or networks, what do I do?
For cabin, you can contact any of the cabin members, Roxanne's from Ohio here, Paul from Tennessee, John from Pennsylvania, any of us cabin folks, where we can connect you with your state representative.
On the table? On the table. There are QR codes you can scan if you want to engage as a network member, just to kind of stay up to date with the shared learnings that come out. One of the things that I think I've mentioned already, but and I hate that Matt already left because I did want to share this information with him also. There's room for steering committee members. There's only a couple of seats that open up. It's a really, although it's very diverse and you know, we try to create equity across the state in terms of joining the steering committee, it's a very high impact, like thought leadership group. And so when I'm in places like this, I know this is, you know, the folks that end up in those seats. I don't make the decision. It's a vote from the steering committee. And so it's election style, but that will happen here coming up. And if you sign that or scan that QR code with your smartphone, you'll get all that info. from our huge communications team, which is a one-person, one-man band. It's Jorge doing a wonderful.
One man band.
Absolutely.
Grammy award winning one man band.
100%. And so, yeah, scan that QR code if you want to engage.
Talk to me. Yes, shoot me an email. I'm sorry, I don't have any business cards. I ran out. But it's also really easy to find us online. If you just Google, APC or Abandoned Properties Coalition.
On the back of, it's posted at the back building's website.
Yep.
So you can find it at back building stuff.
And there's contact information on that website too, that will allow you to get engaged, with us. But yeah, the best way to do it is just to talk to me. You can also talk to Zane, our program coordinator, or probably Carrie or a member of your staff too, right?
Yeah, from Ray,
Really easy. We'd love to have you involved.
Talk to me or talk to Carrie. And we have, the hub does have information about downtown Appalachia Working Group on our website as well.
She might have shot, you took the executive meeting, which we never shouted out. So is that us?
Emily, who would have been here, Emily Kelly was with Woodlands, or Emily Wilson with Woodlands, sorry. Maddie Kaufman from Harvard Community Capital.
Right.
And Ray Moeller from Craftco. So talk to any of us and
thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much to our panel. This was a great discussion and everything during the week. So thank you.